The Enclosed Earth Hypothesis, Volume 3. The Enochian Matrix, Volume 3, The Enclosed Earth Hypothesis. The Chrysalis Argument, Quantum Simulation, Esoteric Anthropology, and the Restoration of the Living Library. A synthesis of metaphysical philosophy, quantum information theory, and the ancient cosmological tradition, toward a unified architecture of consciousness evolution. Foundational Ontology Consciousness Studies, Esoteric Anthropology, Quantum Simulation. This essay synthesizes metaphysical philosophy, quantum information theory, consciousness studies, and esoteric tradition to explore the hypothesis that humanity exists within a carefully engineered consciousness training habitat, a simulated, enclosed Earth designed as a pedagogical chrysalis before reintegration into a higher, more organically coherent planetary dimension known as the Living Library. The central claim: spiritual liberation and scientific breakthrough are not merely compatible but are two descriptions of the same multidimensional threshold event. The hypothesis is not offered as belief but as a map for experiential exploration and direct verification. Section I. Historical and mythological precedent, the recurring pattern of enclosure. Across virtually all human civilizations and spiritual traditions, a consistent mythological and cosmological pattern emerges. Consciousness is portrayed as having become trapped, limited, or imprisoned within material structure. This is not merely a theological problem but a persistent archetypal narrative appearing independently across cultures with no documented historical contact. Its consistency constitutes, at minimum, a data point demanding explanation. Table 1. Cross-tradition survey of the enclosure motif. Tradition. The enclosure mechanism. The ignorance. The path of return. Gnostic. Demiurgic bounded cosmos. Archon administration. Demiurge does not know of higher pleroma. Gnosis, direct knowing through initiation. Platonic. The cave, shadow reality mistaken for totality. Prisoners do not know they are chained. Graduated ascent, eyes learning new light. Vedic, Advaita. Maya, divine power of creative limitation. Atman forgets its identity as Brahman. Jnana, moksha, dissolution of false boundary. Kabbalistic. Symptom, necessary contraction, descent of tree. Malkuth perceives only its own level. Conscious reascent through Sephiroth. Indigenous, ancient. Solid sky vault, firmament as dimensional ceiling. Boundary perceived but purpose unknown. Communication through the permeable membrane. What if these cosmologies are not describing metaphorical truths, but the actual multidimensional structure of a deliberately bounded reality system? The guiding research question. The unifying arc, primordial unity right pointing arrow cosmic separation right pointing arrow initiation right pointing arrow reintegration. Across all five traditions, the same narrative arc resolves: primordial unity in wholeness, a necessary cosmic action that bounds and forgets, an initiatory call to expanded knowing, and a graduated return that retains the capacities developed through the journey of separation. This is not incidental theological similarity. This is the same architecture, described by different civilizations using different vocabularies for what appears to be the same structural experience of dimensional limitation. The demiurge's ignorance, the prisoner's unchosen chains, Maya's purposeful veil, and the Simpson's loving contraction are all descriptions of a single engineering decision, the enclosure, viewed from inside it. Section 2. The physics of the enclosure, quantum simulation and consciousness architecture. In 2003, philosopher Nick Bostrom formalized the simulation argument: if civilizations can create conscious simulations, and if such simulations proliferate, then statistically, any conscious observer is vastly more likely to be within a simulation than in the one original non-simulated substrate. More significantly for this synthesis, Max Tegmark's mathematical universe hypothesis proposes that physical laws are not universal constants, but simply the specific mathematical rules of the particular structure we inhabit, a position that converts the simulation frame from speculative metaphysics into a live physics conjecture. Wheeler's "it from bit" physical reality is fundamentally information. The universe is a self-excited, self-observing system brought into being by conscious observers. Matter is the printout. Information is the source code. Bohm's implicate order. Beneath quantum mechanics lies a deeper level, the implicate order, from which the apparent explicate reality emerges. Separateness and locality are illusions. Each part contains information about the whole. Maldaceni's holographic principle. All information contained in a higher dimensional volume can be encoded on a lower dimensional boundary. Three-dimensional spacetime may be a projection of higher dimensional information fields. Hoffman's conscious realism. Consciousness is primary, space-time is derivative. The physical world is a user interface constructed by consciousness, functional, but not the underlying reality it represents. Wheeler's observer participation. Reality at the quantum level does not exist with definite properties until observed. The observer is not a passive recipient but a co-creator of actualized reality. These frameworks converge on a radical proposition with direct bearing on the enclosed Earth hypothesis. If consciousness is substrate-independent, information-based, and participatory, then the distinction between real and simulated reality collapses entirely. Both equally real to their inhabitants. The enclosure is not a deception, it is a dimensional interface, a bounded expression of a larger multidimensional ecology. As Bohm established, the holographic principle is not computer metaphor but fundamental physical principle. Each part already contains the whole. The cell is real. It simply does not contain the full dimensional range of the organism. The Gnostic archons, the Vedic Maya, Plato's caveguards, and the electromagnetic control mechanisms of contemporary civilization, all may be describing the same phenomenon from different cultural vantage points, the self-maintaining parameters of a bounded consciousness system. Figure 1. Dimensional architecture, from source consciousness to incarnate enclosure. 7. The living library, source consciousness, pleroma, Brahman. 6. Higher dimensional informational field, implicate order. 5. Enochian matrix, holographic substrate and blueprint. 4. Enclosed Earth, design parameter set, consciousness chrysalis. 3. Biosphere, weather, geology, collective unconscious as living data. 2. Incarnate human layer, displaced souls in biological interface. 1. Ego, consensus reality, primary firewall, structural ignorance layer. Ascending order, soul coherence unlocks access to sequentially higher layers. Section 3. Esoteric anthropology, human DNA as multidimensional interface. Tree of life dimensional ascent map. The Adam Kadmon, primordial man of Kabbalistic tradition, is not a historical figure but a multidimensional archetype, the template of fully integrated, fully conscious humanity, containing within itself all Sephiroth of the Tree of Life, fully activated. Contemporary esoteric interpretation holds that individual humans are fragments or projections of this archetypal form, each carrying in DNA and energy structure the potential geometry of the complete template. As consciousness awakens, the fragmented aspects are gradually reintegrated, not as ego aggrandizement but as the recovery of one's complete multidimensional nature. The structure of DNA itself is revealing. The double helix is a spiral, a toroidal rotation, a fundamental pattern appearing throughout nature and sacred geometry. DNA contains 64 codons corresponding directly to the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching. The speculation this invites is significant, that DNA is not merely a biological inheritance mechanism but a multidimensional antenna, a specific geometric arrangement of carbon and nucleic acids tuning consciousness to operate across different information densities. The living library, memory and destination. The living library, described across channeled esoteric sources and appearing as a structuring concept across this entire cosmological project, is both memory and destination. It is what the family of light souls were before the enclosure, and what they are becoming as they awaken within it. It is not a place one travels to but a state of consciousness one attains access to, a repository of all knowledge organized not in linear form but in holographic resonance, where each piece of information contains and interconnects with all other information. Accessing it requires the consciousness and frequency coherence to interface with this higher dimensional ecology. Spiritual practices, esotericism, and what the uninitiated classify as magic are, within this framework, advanced data retrieval methods. By achieving soul coherence, an individual generates the correct cryptographic key to interface directly with the Enochian matrix, unlocking dormant fragments of the transdimensional record that have been indexed but inaccessible since the original collapse. The mystic and the systems architect are running the same operation. Section IV. The inversion system, architecture of controlled consciousness. The esoteric concept of archons can be reinterpreted not as external demonic entities but as structural mechanisms embedded in the fabric of the enclosed system itself, mechanisms that maintain the coherence and parameters of limitation without requiring conscious administrators. These mechanisms operate at three distinct levels: psychological, electromagnetic, and symbolic. Each level is self-reinforcing. Together they constitute what Baudrillard called hyper-reality, the substitution of simulations for reality so complete that the substitution becomes invisible. Psychological. The ego firewall. When consciousness identifies exclusively with the ego's perspective, it becomes locked into a narrow bandwidth of perception, fundamentally separate, threatened, and motivated by scarcity. Under ego identification, consciousness cannot perceive the larger unified field or access the higher dimensional information available to less bounded states of awareness. The ego is not the enemy. Identification with limitation is the mechanism. Electromagnetic frequency tuning. The Earth's Schumann resonance, approximately 7.83 Hz, appears to be a fundamental frequency with which human consciousness naturally resonates. Contemporary civilization has overlaid this with power line frequencies, cellular radiation, and Wi-Fi, an electromagnetic environment speculated to maintain consciousness in anxiety-responsive, perceptually bounded states. Conversely, exposure to natural harmonics facilitates coherence, healing, and expanded awareness. Electromagnetic frequency is not merely coincidental to consciousness, it is a direct tuning mechanism. Symbolic, linguistic, consensus reality as enclosure. Language and symbol actively shape consciousness rather than merely transmit information. Consensus reality, the agreed-upon version of what is real, possible, and acceptable, functions as a symbolic enclosure. Within it, certain ideas are naturalized. This is just how the world is, while others are pathologized. This person is delusional. The control mechanism operates not through conscious conspiracy but through the structural logic of the systems themselves. The inversion principle. The control mechanism does not merely prevent awakening, it actively inverts the path, redirecting consciousness's natural drive toward growth into channels that deepen enclosure. Section V. The reconstitution of reality, coherence, phase shift and the Great Reawakening. If consciousness is fundamentally informational and operates within a system calibrated by specific parameters, then transformation requires altering those parameters through what might be called coherence elevation. In physics, coherence refers to the property of a wave or system where constituent parts vibrate in phase. Coherent light, laser, cuts through steel. Incoherent light merely illuminates. The analogy is structural. A coherent consciousness has unified intention, integrated awareness, and effective access to higher dimensional information. An incoherent consciousness is fragmented, contradictory, and perceptually bounded to the lower dimensional substrate. Harmonic synchronization, bringing consciousness into resonance with higher frequency harmonics through meditation, sound, movement, or direct exposure to higher dimensional information. As individual frequency rises, lower frequency control mechanisms lose their grip and higher dimensional information becomes increasingly perceptible. Information integration, the unification of compartmentalized aspects of self, work self, family self, shadow, into a coherent whole. Integrated consciousness is more capable of higher dimensional perception than fragmented consciousness, regardless of spiritual tradition. Coherent community field, individual coherence is exponentially amplified in coherent groups. Multiple consciousnesses aligned in shared intention create a collective field effect extending beyond individual participants, affecting the electromagnetic environment and consciousness field of larger populations. Activation of dormant capacities. Through specific practices and initiations, dormant neural pathways, glandular functions, and genetic codes are activated. The opening of the pineal gland, the awakening of the Kundalini energy system, the integration of higher brain centers, these are not metaphorical but correspond to actual physiological transformations. The phase transition, merging the holographic earth with the living library. As collective coherence reaches critical thresholds, the electromagnetic and informational parameters of Earth itself begin to shift. The boundaries between the enclosed Earth and the higher dimensional living library become increasingly permeable. Historical collective awakenings, Renaissance, Reformation, Enlightenment, appear as discontinuous jumps in collective consciousness, not linear progress. The jump occurs when a coherent frequency critical mass is reached and the collective field suddenly phase shifts into a new harmonic range. In the current transition, indicators converge, Earth's electromagnetic frequency rising, dimensional boundaries softening, perceptual range expanding, pre-enclosure memory surfacing, dormant genetic and spiritual capacities spontaneously reactivating. The phase shift is not a destruction of Earth but a reintegration, Earth revealing itself as a three-dimensional expression of a multi-dimensional living system. The chrysalis does not kill the caterpillar, it completes it.